Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. This is a follow-up to my video on the Four Horsemen. In it, I made a reference, which it turns out a lot of people didn't get. It's not as common a reference as I thought it was. And since it's actually rather interesting and the reference sort of has some interesting layers, I wanted to explain what it was a reference to, and then just talk about it a little bit. So, I'm going to read a section of the Acts of the Apostles, because this is where the reference comes from. This is the speech that St. Peter gave. This is right after Pentecost, and they came out, and the apostles had been preaching, and people heard them in their native languages. And then St. Peter started preaching. Men of Israel, listen to what I am going to say. Jesus the Nazarene was a man commended to you by God, by the miracles and portents and signs that God worked through him when he was among you, as you know. This man, who was put into your power by the deliberate intention and foreknowledge of God, you took and had crucified and killed by men outside the law. But God raised him to life, freeing him from the pangs of Hades, for it was impossible for him to be held in its power since, as David says of him, I kept the Lord before my sight always, for with him at my right hand nothing can shake me. So my heart rejoiced, my tongue delighted, my body too will rest secure. For you will not abandon me to Hades, or allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have taught me the way of life. You will fill me with your joy in your presence. Brothers, no one can deny that the patriarch David himself is dead and buried. His tomb is still with us. But since he was a prophet, and knew that God had sworn him an oath to make one of his descendants succeed him on the throne, he spoke with foreknowledge about the resurrection of Christ. He is the one who was not abandoned to Hades, and whose body did not see corruption. God raised this man Jesus to life. Of that we are all witnesses. Now raised to the heights by God's right hand, he has received from the Father the Holy Spirit, who was promised, and what you see and hear is the outpouring of that Spirit. For David himself never went up to heaven, but yet he said, The Lord declared to my Lord, Take your seat at my right hand, till I have made your enemies your footstool. For this reason, the whole house of Israel can be certain that the Lord and Christ whom God has made is this Jesus, whom you crucified. Okay, so the line, I hope I mentioned it, was that Christopher Hitchens is dead and his tomb is still with us. That was a reference to this, where Peter said, David is dead and buried, and his tomb is still with us. Now, so first off, it's a reference to that. Now, if you look, what was St. Peter saying here? He was talking about, well, a great many things, but one of them, and kind of the particularly relevant part here, was that the patriarch David, who is the great king of Israel, is dead, and he stayed dead. This everyone knew. His tomb is still here. He did not come back from the dead. He's quite dead in the normal fashion. Now, no one expected him to come back from the dead, of course. But he's just highlighting this point that even the great King David stayed in his tomb. By contrast, Jesus didn't. And there's that interesting sort of implication. We know where David's tomb is. You can go find it. Go find Jesus's. Now, there's a little bit of ambiguity on the meaning of the word tomb, but it doesn't mean the grave, but rather the resting place of the dead body, which is pretty obvious from context, given that he's talking about the fact that Jesus is not dead and David is. So taking this to Christopher Hitchens, that now, of course, no one expects Christopher Hitchens to come back from the dead, but there is a great deal of reverence paid to him and the power of his words, and yet, for all that, he's dead in the ordinary manner and stayed dead in the ordinary manner. And so, as I said, it's not that anyone expected him to come back, but it's just a highlight of the gulf, that he is no replacement for Christ in any way. Now, obviously, atheists will think that, of course, Jesus is still in his tomb as well. The ones who haven't gone off on the whole Christ, was it the Christ mythic Christ, something like that? That pipe dream. Anyway, so I'm not saying that an atheist will recognize Jesus as having risen from the dead, obviously, but rather just that it highlights how much a Christopher Hitchens doesn't really, in the end, offer anything. He offers at most something momentary, something passing, something very transient. And now he's gone, and he's not offering that anymore. So, that's some of the layers in there that first off, simply he is gone. I mean, if you put up the Four Horsemen, you should kind of X his one out, in a sense, out of respect for his beliefs, that he doesn't exist anymore, so he's gone. Now there's the idea of remembering, which itself is very interesting. I'm not going to get into that here, because that's the whole concept of memory, of remembering a person, so on. It's a subject for its own video. But just sort of the final thing on that is that he was offering himself, or his ideas. He was offering, to some degree, just his drunken ramblings. Because, I mean, if you want to be honest with yourself about what was Christopher Hitchens doing, the man had an incredibly forceful personality. Of course, much of that force came out of a bottle. Not all of it. He still presumably had something of a forceful personality. But at the same time, I read, though I can't track down where again, a quote from Hitchens saying that he didn't really see much point in all this when he was sober, which is why he spent all day, every day drunk. But if you really look at Christopher Hitchens, I did a video just taking apart his 3 minutes of his thing about how heaven is a celestial North Korea. And it's nonsense. It's nothing follows from anything else that he said for the most part. His conclusion is stupid. The premises are barely coherent, and there's no chain of logic between them at all. If you really actually try to look at it, like anyone who doesn't believe me, I defy you to diagram out in a lot. Actually put it in formal logic. Like, state the premises, state how they logically follow until you get to his actual conclusion. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can't even get very far in it. He had a great force of personality, though, whether it came from a bottle or not. And that's what people were attracted to. He had all this moral certainty, despite also being a moral subjectivist. There's a reason why the distributist actually dubbed it the Hitchens two-step, where you're morally certain when that's convenient, and all morality is relative, and just feelings and so on when that's convenient. Hitchens was the master at it, and man, when he wanted to be morally certain, was he morally certain, even if he massively contradicted himself moments before, minutes before, just at other points. That's what he offered, that sort of vitality. Well, that's gone. He's dead. There's no vitality left. He's not offering anything. And so that's in contrast to Christ, where again, because an atheist will always stop and say, like, you all know he's not. But here's the thing: no one believes that Christopher Hitchens is offering anything anymore. Everybody believes that Christopher Hitchens is still in his grave. If Christians are right, Christ is offering a great deal more. If they're wrong, of course, he's not. But that sort of thing, if you look at this diagram, there is nothing anyone believes Christopher Hitchens is offering anymore. A large fraction of the world believes there's something Jesus is offering. And ultimately, for those who don't believe it, it comes down to, I'm not talking about Pascal's wager here, but just the interesting thing that there is in, if you diagram this out, there's one quadrant in which anything significant is meant, is signified by any of this. In the other ones, none of it matters. So, anyway, that's sort of just some of the ideas of getting at with that line that Christopher Hitchens is dead and his tomb is still with us. And so, hope that helps for anyone for whom that was not an obvious reference. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.